I don't have memories left of my past. The faces of my real parents were like faded masks in my mind. I only have some remains of my childhood, faceless names and total darkness. At the age of 9, something had happened in my family. The trauma was so deep that it made me forget most of my life. I only had the shred of a memory related to my best friend. He was the only one that I had. It was an image stuck in my mind, going together with laughter in the background and the melody of a music box. Among the black holes of my amnesia, I caught a glimpse of his honey-colored eyes and his dark mahogany hair. I remembered his friendly smile, but nothing else. And all the rest disappeared in the darkness. And so did he. The memories went back to the orphanage. Some amazing foster parents, Madalena and Stephen, who gave me back the warm feeling of having a family, adopted me, a feeling which I had forgotten. They raised me in their house until the age of 15. My amnesia led me to go to examinations and psychological checkups, which year after year were slowly starting to fail. It looked like I wouldn't be able to get my memory back. On one hand, I wanted to know what happened, but on the other, an odd feeling of anxiety. Obviously, there was some unpleasant consequence to my trauma. It was just like some paranoia of being persecuted by something. The doctors told my parents it must have been linked to a particular memory, which was continuously stimulated. Neither the cause nor what exactly it was clear, but despite my efforts, I couldn't focus on it. I felt like I was being observed, not by people, but by the stuffed animals in my room. It was stupid, I know. At the beginning, they were simply toys, but time and time again, their big, round eyes seemed to stare at me. Since I was little, I thought the stuffed toys in my room were alive, and sometimes I tried to prove it. I spied out of my room with the door left ajar. Then I turned back suddenly and never took my eyes off them, not until I felt a bit of a burning sensation from not blinking. That memory was one of the few from my childhood that still made me smile. But that's changed now. Time after time, the stuffed toys were the ones staring at me. It almost looked like they wanted to test me. I couldn't bear it anymore. The thought was rooted in my mind. At times, it seemed to me that they moved, turned their little faces towards me. At other times, they made small, almost unnoticeable noises in my room. Now, this couldn't be true, obviously. Why did this thought persist me? Why did I hate those stuffed toys? In spite of everything, why didn't I just get rid of them? I could have given them to other children, or thrown them into the trash. And one day I tried, I really did. But when I took one of them in my arms, a strong sense of anxiety and terror stopped me. I always ended up putting them back to their places, on the furniture, on my bed, on the shelves. And then I had to take my anxiety pills. There was only one toy I took along with me during the night. Despite my age, I couldn't separate from him. And I felt a familiar affection from him that started long before my amnesia. I found him in my wardrobe at the orphanage, and from there on out, we became inseparable. It was a sweet bunny, with ears as long as him. On one side, it was red, and on the other side was a caramel color. He wore a black waistcoat with 2 long sleeves that draped down to one point at his feet, and dashed an elegant collar that donned pointed tips at every edge of the fabric. His little left beaded eye was covered with a stylish frill eye patch, and at the center were a black button. It was funny. It looked like the only stuffed toy that was harmless. He slept by my side ever since I was little. Just like that night. After I snuck under the sheets, falling asleep almost instantly among the creaking old walls. I was standing still in the darkness, unable to move, and I couldn't understand how I ended up there, surrounded only by the distilled silence. Something slimy grabbed my wrist, and it held me so tightly that an instant pain shot right through me. A set of white nails slowly penetrated my flesh. I watched them cut through my skin, making me bleed. I screamed and cried, but a laugh bellowed through, covering my desperate pleas.
She belongs to me.
A voice whispered to me. Within that dark abyss, 2 green sparkling eyes appeared before me. They were a few inches away from my face.
You are only a hindrance to me.
He laughed, amused by my pain, while he pierced needles under my nails, into my flesh. He ruined my body with rusty tools. On the contrary, he said he was going to fix me up. I noticed an open door, the only thing that I could distinguish from the darkness. My eyes blurred by the pain, I saw a glimpse of people standing still, gazing down at me. The image of that door got closer, and as it did, to my horror, a new vision came into focus. Their vacant expressions. I saw that they were not real people. They were dolls, and in some way I felt a strong sense of nausea overcome me just from the sight of them. There was something about them that made me weak to my stomach, and maybe it was their extraordinary and macabre resemblance to real people.
She belongs to me.
With that, I woke up. My eyes wide open and the beating of my heart so loud that I could feel it pounding inside my throat. I couldn't breathe, so I stood up. I collapsed back down. I rubbed my eyes, and I realized that I was sweating. The bunny fell, landing upside down. I leaned down for him and put him back on the bed. My breathing returned to its normal pace, but the image of those needles, dirty from blood, those terrifying dolls, remained embedded in my mind. I never had a nightmare like that before. The feelings were so terribly real. I still felt those claws making a hole in my flesh, but I was relieved I woke up. The door squeaked. It was my mom coming in the room. As soon as she saw my exhausted face, a smile on hers faded away.
Honey, are you okay?
Yeah, I only had a nightmare. Everything's alright now.
Well, okay. Daisy came to visit you. I told her to wait for you in the living room.
With that, I got out from bed. I was dressed poorly. I didn't want my best friend to see me in that way. In a span of a few minutes, I came out of my room neat and ready. In my haste, I was out of breath.
Finally!
I met Daisy in middle school, and ever since then, we were inseparable. She was kind and a gorgeous person. She was always welcome in our house. My parents appreciated her good manners, but what I loved about her especially was that she never asked me anything about my past. My adoption, my parents, my memories. I chose to tell her about my amnesia in complete confidence. The day was nice and sunny, so we laid down in the garden, under an old tupelo tree. We talked while sheltering from the sun in the shade of the tree. I had brought some colored pencils and blank sheets of paper, and we both started drawing. Daisy grew bored immediately. She had no interest in drawing, and it appeared nature did little to entertain her. She started picking flowers, putting them in her blonde braid, while she gossiped about Louisa, a girl who lived for being the center of people's attention. While my friend was talking, I listened to her without taking my eyes off the sheet of paper, entranced by my artwork.
Who's that?
It was as if I fell asleep in that exact moment. I batted my eyelids in front of the sheet of paper, and I felt rather confused about seeing a drawing repeated several times on the same character. I don't know. I did not have the slightest idea who he was. The clearest drawing showed a man wearing a black jacket with an extravagant and voluminous fur on his shoulders. He had a beautiful, happy smile and 2 yellow eyes that were covered a bit by his fringe. He wore dark clothing, and in his hands he was holding a little blue case, resembling a music box. Maybe I saw him in an illustration book.
Illustration book? Why would you waste your time with those these days? It's too hot for reading and drawing. Let's go get some ice cream.
Daisy furrowed her brow, changing the subject of our conversation, seemingly not interested at all. Night fell.
She belongs to me.
I woke up at 2 a.m. breathing rapidly. I curled up, feeling the wall behind my back. I put my hands over my face. I breathed deeply. It was just a dream. It was just a dream. I looked over at the bunny next to me, which was looking back at me with his black eye and with an irritated glance. I threw it to the floor. Since the moment I started sleeping with that thing, my dreams turned into meaningless nightmares. I turned around to rest my legs, and in that moment, I touched something with my foot. I elevated my gaze, and I noticed a doll sitting on my bed. At first, I was frozen in place. All I could do was stare at her. I didn't understand how she appeared there. My mind started thinking back to my parents. Maybe they had given me a present. Perhaps. I didn't have a real thing for dolls, and to tell the truth, her presence in my room seriously bothered me. It was a peculiar doll, made of wax, with unusual characteristics. She had a headdress of flowers. A few locks of her hair caressed her cheeks. She wore an embroidered white lace dress, with a black ribbon tied to her waist. Her arms were unordinarily long. She had long, tapering fingers that were far from normal. What caught my attention the most was a rose put at the center of her mouth, as if it were supposed to silence her. I looked at her closely, scanned her under the moonlight. I touched her face, and realized there was something wrong. I kneeled down and tried to get an even closer look at her. I then heard something, a sort of subdued sound, like a wheeze. It was coming from the same doll. It was coming from the doll. Screaming, I let her fall down to the floor and stood up in horror, trembling violently, pushing myself back to the wall, screaming for my parents. And that's when things turned surreal. The wall next to the door enlarged, like there was a bubble between the paint and the cement. Slowly, some cracks appeared as they increased in number. The paint fell into pieces, landing on the floor as it revealed a blue door. I hadn't the slightest idea of what was happening. These kinds of things only happen in movies or our imagination, but in my astonishment, I felt something was going to come out of that door. And to my suspicion, from the door inched the same black hands that I witnessed in my nightmares.
Aren't you happy about Daisy coming to visit you, are you?
Said the monster standing on the threshold of that door.
I didn't like her either. She screamed a lot.
Daisy? What does she have to do with this? I looked around confused, looking for the presence of my friend that obviously was not there anymore, before finally my eyes passed over the doll. That blonde hair and face made of wax looked strangely familiar. I held my breath. A nightmare. It must have been another nightmare. I rushed over to the doll, and I turned her face in my trembling hands. I put my ear over her chest. and heard another sound along with that terrible wheeze. The pounding of a heart. "Daisy! Daisy!" I cried desperately. It had to be a nightmare. Something like this could not be happening. My parents must have been just outside of the door. They must have heard me screaming, but the monster blocked the entrance. He pulled the door shut, locking it, deforming the wood. My parents were banging on the other side, calling out to me to open it. I didn't know what to do. It didn't look like a dream. It was perfectly clear. It was more real than those nightmares of darkness and torture. My heart was beating so fast. It felt like it could crack my ribs just on its own. I felt the sweat on my forehead and the doll trembling in my hands, which I couldn't keep still. The monster stood at the entrance, not moving from there. In the half-light, I could see his evil smirk, as if he were waiting for my reaction. I unbuttoned Daisy's dress, who looked imprisoned under her tons of wax, and I started to dig, trying to set her free. I dug, and I dug, and I dug, while her moans became more intense, until I felt something wet under my nails. I looked at my hands covered with blood. Her skin must have been mixed with the wax, and the digging I did was not helping her at all. That thing that's supposed to be Daisy was suffering. Her wheezing was blood-curdling, but her expression was still that of an impassive doll. I trembled with horror. I had to repress a retch, and suddenly I felt fingers wrapping around my arm.
My dear boy, you've ruined your doll!
His white eyes sparkled with a pale green light.
You even threw Mr. Bunny on the floor, but I forgive you. You must return to the place where you belong, by my side.
Who the hell are you? I shook like mad, trying to set myself free while my parents were trying to break down the door. The expression of that creature was filled with astonishment.
I am Jason the ToyMaker. Your faithful friend, the only one you could trust.
At hearing that name, something moved in my memories like an electric shock running from my brain and through my body. With a loud crash, my father burst through my bedroom door and bathed the room in light. But I could finally see him clearly. The monster's face primed a bomb that exploded, setting me free from the memories that were buried deep in the corners of my mind all those years. I remembered the day that we met for the first time. The toys that seemed to blossom from his hands. I remembered his friendly smile that gradually turned into a sharp and sadistic smirk. That day he showed me with his expression. He expected me to give him more attention because of his arrogance. He believed he deserved everything from me. But he grew tired of me. Then he showed me what he really was. He revealed that he slowly killed off every person that I had in my life. I managed to escape from his clutches, running as far as I could away from him, but no matter how far I ran, the smell of blood and the decomposed flesh lingered in the air. It was you. I was possessed by anger and I started hitting him. You! Jason was smiling, as if it was tickling him. He didn't have any remorse for ruining my life. He was a possessive beast who concealed himself from my childish eyes behind an angel's face. He was able to give me everything, and at the same time, to destroy everything around me. He was a demon.
Of course it was me, my splendid creature. Mr. Bunny even showed it to you. I made for you many toys. I can't wait to introduce you to your new dolls, Mommy and Daddy.
Suddenly something hit his head. It shattered into a million pieces. My father had a wooden chair. He had aimed the blow at the monster, but the thing that had broke was the wood. Jason's smile turned into an infuriated scowl, and his grip increased on my wrist. He looked around, and when my father saw Jason's face, he opened his eyes wide. My mother covered her mouth to conceal her screams. My father didn't waste time. He tried again to set me free. With an angered grin, Jason released me into my father's arms. Together with my parents, I ran from that room. We quickly rushed towards an escape from the house. My father opened the door, but instead of the garden path, there was Jason's workshop.
Oh, my boy. I give you one last chance, after which I'll dye the walls with the blood of all the people who surrounded you.
To the kitchen, quick!
We ran to the kitchen, hearing that monster's laugh following us. We could still see through the windows, the ToyMaker's little factory. The terror overwhelmed me, and Daisy's blood on my fingers were more real than anything else that I could have felt. There was no way that this could have been a nightmare. I turned around. Where's Dad? My mother grabbed a knife and got closer to me, holding me tightly in her arms.
Stephen!
We sighed with relief when we saw him coming to the kitchen.
Hurry up, before...
My mother's voice faded and went hoarse. We stared at Dad's pale face. He walked slowly, with a blank expression, eyes staring into space. And then... he fell to the floor. Behind him appeared Jason's frozen smile. The ToyMaker looked at me with crazed eyes.
Dad's battery undead. He needs a bit of a recharge.
Jason revealed a giant mechanical key, driving it into my father's back, already stained with blood. He turned it with a force, twisting my father's backbone. At the second turn, I shouted, covering my ears, blocking out the sound of breaking bones, but I couldn't help taking my eyes off my father's body, contorting itself like a snake.
Go away! Be gone! Leave my child alone!
My mother held me tight at her chest, and despite the terror and tears she shed, her face resembled that of a lioness shielding her cub.
Silence, woman. It's not you who I want to talk to.
The furious ToyMaker pointed his white claw at me.
Come with me, my sweet friend. We will have fun together. We will be back to laughing like we did all those years ago.
No! You're a psychopath! I don't know what kind of monster you are, but I want you out! I want you out of my life! At the sound of my refusal, Jason's face clouded over. He started to rage, to contort himself, to jerk his head as if he had somehow broken because of me.
Out of your life? Out of your life?
He screamed, grinding his teeth, his face becoming more terrifying.
I was the only one staying by your side when your parents abandoned you at the orphanage. I was a loyal friend while the ones surrounding you used you, laughed at you.
He came closer.
I gave you all my attention. I gave you all of my toys. You needed nothing else. No one else, and I never asked for anything in return. I had your best intentions in mind. That's why I destroyed everything that hurt you. Your parents were never going to come back to you anyway. The other children, they were better off dead. I wanted you to be happy by my side, and after I looked for you for so long, you even forgot me. I was a true friend, and you turned your back on me.
Suddenly, his furious face relaxed. But not his insane smile.
Ah, but of course. If you had forgotten me when I gave you everything, there must be something wrong with you.
What?
You really were a very bad child. So I have to fix you up.
My mother, who was paralyzed by Jason's tirade, suddenly awoke and pointed her knife at him.
If you dare lay a hand on my son, I swear I will kill you!
Jason looked at my mother with a challenging gaze and slowly came closer. The knife was trembling in my mother's hand, all the while the ToyMaker gave her that menacing grin. She couldn't stand the tension. She pushed me behind her and hurled herself on him. My mother stabbed him repeatedly in his chest, what should have been piercing his heart, and the monster opened his eyes wide. He made a contortion of pain, and my mother smiled triumphant. But in that moment, a smirk reappeared on Jason's face. He opened his arms with nonchalance. My mother was shocked and stood still for just a second, but she was possessed by the need to protect her family, her son, and returned to her attack, trying desperately to make him react somehow. The disgusting sounds of flesh pierced by knife could be heard clearly while the shirt was ripping. But Jason kept his balance perfectly.
That's enough now.
With a swift motion of his hand, he knocked my mother roughly to the floor.
I'll be in trouble if you scratched it.
I was by my mother's side as quickly as I could, helping her get to her knees. The side of her face was already swollen. My eyes leapt to the ToyMaker. I was waiting for him to attack, but I was petrified when I glimpsed what he was doing. He unbuttoned his shirt and drove his nails into his chest, close enough to the injuries that he had gotten from the knife. He sank his claws into the flesh and slowly started pulling on the opposite sides. The wound appeared as a little rip in the center, which enlarged as the skin and muscle shredded like paper. A thick black liquid dripped to the floor. It was not blood. Even if it was, it must have been something rotten, something sparkled in his exposed ribcage. He took his hands off the exposed chest and covered the hole with his shirt, hiding the music box that started to play from the inside. He then came closer. I wanted to scream, I wanted to beg, but the horror that I had witnessed left me completely paralyzed to do anything. It only took a yank for the Toymaster to tear her out of my arms. He lifted her without effort and pulled her into his chest. He clenched one arm around her neck while holding the knife-wielding hand in the other.
Now, I'll show you what happens to worms that get in my way.
He slowly bent her arm the opposite direction. She cried from pain while trying to set herself free, but that monster was too strong. With a sickening snap, the bones shattered. All right, please, I'll come with you," I shouted with all the voice that I had in my body. Jason raised his stare and gave me a serious look. My mother was becoming paler due to the pain and the blood loss. She needed my help, but there was nothing that I could do. "You can take me with you, but leave my mother alone," I said. "After all, we're friends, right?" I tried to make a convincing smile, despite the fact that I was trembling from head to toe and my eyes were filled with tears. Jason smirked. He was outright satisfied and pleased with his victory.
Excellent choice, my boy.
At that moment, his arms took back their usual color. His laceration sealed in a few seconds, and he was back to his usual appearance. His face returned to normal. But I already knew what he concealed behind those amber-colored eyes. It seems Jason accepted my surrender, but before leaving my mother, he took out of his pocket a small, red, wind-up mouse. It was unmistakably a toy. He grabbed my mother from her jaw and pushed it into her mouth.
What's wrong, Mom? Did the mouse take your tongue?
He laughed, amused, pushing her away from him. I saw my mother's eyes, wide and frightened. A light. She fell to her knees. Her jaw, her nose, and her eyes a bloody pulp. She fell to the ground. A stain of blood enlarged from under her body. Blood and pieces of flesh spurted onto me, but I was paralyzed in front of my mother's corpse. Well, Jason didn't stop laughing. Why? Why did you do that? The ToyMaker's overwhelming shadow covered me and bent down to me. His face got closer, which was soiled by a tear in his flesh.
Because I'm not your friend anymore. I'm your creator.
His long, slender fingers snaked around